It was late April 2020. The world was in the grip of the pandemic, and lockdowns had become the new norm. Maria, a 22-year-old college student, had been forced to return to her childhood home in rural North Carolina when classes shifted online. It wasn't the first time she'd had to adjust to something she didn't expect, but this felt different. For the most part, she was happy to be home with her family, but it was a lonely kind of happiness. Her parents worked long hours and often stayed overnight at their jobs. Maria found herself alone most of the time, living in a house surrounded by thick woods and long, empty roads. At first, the silence of the house was a comfort. She spent her days doing online schoolwork, reading, and cooking meals. She had a big, spacious bedroom upstairs with large windows that overlooked the backyard and the dark stretch of trees beyond. As spring began to warm the air, Maria kept the window open, enjoying the sounds of birds chirping and the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. But over time, strange things began to happen. It started small. One night, while she was on a video call with her friends, she thought she saw something move in the corner of her eye. Just a shadow, shifting at the edge of her vision. When she turned to look, there was nothing. It could have been a deer or the sway of the trees in the breeze. She didn't think much of it. A few nights later, it happened again, another quick movement at the edge of the woods. This time, she felt a chill run through her body. She mentioned it to her friends, but they brushed it off, telling her she was just paranoid. Maria laughed it off too, agreeing that it was probably nothing. But then, the movements became more frequent. A shadow near the tree line. The floodlights in the backyard would flicker on at odd times, but when Maria checked, there was nothing there. One night, she was sitting at her desk, chatting with her friends on a late-night call, when she noticed something. Her eyes darted to the window. There, just outside her backyard, stood a figure. Oh man. His silhouette was barely visible in the dim light of the motion sensor floodlights, but she could see enough to know something was terribly wrong. He stood motionless, looking in her direction, his face obscured by the shadow of the trees. Maria froze. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she was paralyzed with fear. She quickly ducked down below the window, her hands trembling. She could still hear the figure's soft, uneven breathing. Maria texted her parents, but they were hours away. Her dad suggested she lock all the windows and stay away from the window until he could get home. She spent the next hour in her bed, shaking, waiting for the sound of sirens or footsteps. Her mind raced with the terrifying thought that someone had been watching her for days, even longer. The man didn't make a sound, and after what felt like an eternity, he slowly disappeared into the darkness. The next day, her dad insisted on installing additional locks on all the windows. They called the sheriff's office, who promised to send someone out to investigate. By the time the deputies arrived, the man was long gone, but they found evidence suggesting that he had been there. Cigarette butts were scattered beneath her window, and there were partial footprints leading toward the woods. They followed the tracks for a while, but lost them when they reached a small creek. Despite everything being secure, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there. Over the next few days, the motion lights would go on at odd hours of the night. Her dad would go outside to check, only to find nothing. But the strange thing was, every time they checked the outside of the house, the footprints leading toward the trees seemed to appear again and then disappear as quickly as they came. Weeks passed without any more incidents. The man never returned, but Maria couldn't help but wonder, had he been there all along, waiting for her to notice? The sheriff's department could never track him down, and they eventually closed the case. But Maria could never forget the feeling of being watched. She still wonders how long the man had been standing outside her window, silently observing her, waiting for the right moment to make his move. Tyler and Don had been roommates for almost a year at a rental house in Ohio. The house was old, and it had a dark, musty basement. The two friends had never really needed to go down there, and they didn't give much thought to the basement door, which remained locked most of the time. The landlord had said the basement was for storage and that it wasn't meant for tenants to use. Tyler and Dan didn't care much for its out of sight, out of mind. When the lockdown started, their other two roommates decided to go home to stay with family, leaving Tyler and Dan alone in the house. At first, they didn't mind the quiet. They got used to it, spending their days in the house, attending online classes and binge watching shows. However, as time went on, strange things began to happen. It started with soft noises. The first time Tyler heard it, he thought it was just the house settling. A light knock, followed by a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. At first, Tyler dismissed it as the wind or the house making noises. But the noises persisted. One night, it was around 2 a.m. when Tyler woke to the sound again. This time, the knocking was louder, followed by what sounded like scraping or dragging, slow and deliberate. It was coming from the basement. Tyler tried to ignore it, but the noise continued for what seemed like an eternity. Eventually, he got out of bed and tiptoed into the hallway, trying not to wake Dan. He stood near the basement door, straining to listen. The knocking stopped. Then, he heard it again, low, almost indistinguishable whispers. Not voices, but whispers. Tyler froze in place. The whispers sounded like muffled voices coming from behind the door. Hey, knocked once, trying to make sure he wasn't just imagining things. Silence followed. He knocked again, harder this time, but there was no response. After a few moments, Tyler reluctantly went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The whispers had unsettled him, and he kept thinking he had heard something in that basement. But what? The next day, he mentioned the noises to Dan. Dan wasn't convinced. He joked that Tyler was probably just hearing things. But when they heard the scraping sound again that night, they decided to take action. The two friends stood by the basement door, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. But once again, when they knocked, the noise stopped. Later that week, the landlord showed up to check on things. Tyler and Dan mentioned the strange sounds, and the landlord laughed it off. He suggested it was probably just an animal stuck down there, maybe a squirrel or something small that had gotten into the basement through a vent. He promised to come by and check the basement, but didn't seem all that concerned. That night, Tyler set up a voice recorder near the basement door to try and capture the noises. The next morning, he listened to the recording. What he heard made his blood run cold. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the dragging sounds started. Then came the whispers, low and indecipherable. But at one point, the whispers turned into a loud growl, followed by a strange scraping noise, as if something had been dragged across the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the recording cut off. Tyler felt a sense of dread settle in his stomach. Something or someone was in that basement. The landlord arrived the next afternoon. He unlocked the basement door and led Tyler and Dan downstairs. The basement was dark and musty, with a lingering smell of mildew and rot. Dust covered everything. The air felt thick, and there was an oppressive weight in the room. But as they searched the space, they found something disturbing. A sleeping bag, half-eaten food wrappers, and a small space heater plugged into an extension cord. The more they looked, the more they realized that someone had been living down there. Backpack, clothes, and even a bottle of water were found scattered across the floor. There were signs that someone had been squatting in the basement for weeks, maybe even longer. The landlord was shaken, but insisted that there was nothing to be done. They couldn't be sure who had been living there or for how long. The police were called, but without evidence of a break-in, there wasn't much they could do. After that night, Tyler and Dan moved out. They never heard the scraping sounds again, but both of them wondered who had been living beneath them and what they had been doing during those strange nights. In the summer of 2020, Anna had just lost her job due to the pandemic. She was struggling to make ends meet and was desperate for a place to stay. Most of the rental listings she found were either too expensive or had already been rented out. That's when she came across an ad on Craigslist for a small one-bedroom guest house located behind a larger property. The listing seemed almost too good to be true. The guest house was fully furnished and included all utilities for just $500 a month. The owner, a man named Greg, had stated in the ad that he lived in the main house and mostly kept to himself. Anna contacted him right away. When they met, Greg was quiet but polite. He was a man in his late 50s with short gray hair and a kind, almost reserved demeanor. Anna immediately felt at ease and decided to rent the guest house. At first, everything seemed perfect. The small house was cozy, and Anna loved the privacy. She spent her days adjusting to her new life, working on job applications and taking care of herself. But soon, things started to feel off. It started with strange noises outside her door. At night, she would hear footsteps walking around the back of the guest house. It was always the same slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was walking just outside the door, stopping, then walking again. She mentioned it to Greg, but he assured her that it was just the wind or maybe animals in the yard. He seemed sincere enough, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, one night, Anna heard something different. It wasn't just footsteps. This time, it was a soft knocking on the door. She thought it was Greg at first, but when she checked, there was no one there. The knocking continued, always late at night. Anna started to feel like she was being watched. One evening, she came home to find the back door slightly ajar. She was sure she had locked it when she left. Panicked, she checked the house, but everything seemed to be in place. Her mind raced. Had someone been inside? She installed a security camera the next day, hoping to capture any strange activity. That night, around 2:30 a.m., she was alerted by the camera app on her phone. She checked the feed. Greg was standing just outside the back door. He was wearing a hoodie, his face obscured by shadows. He wasn't knocking or trying to enter. He was just standing there, staring into the darkness. Anna's heart pounded. She had to confront him. When she did, Greg denied it. He claimed he had been in bed, sound asleep, and that she was imagining things. He even suggested she was under stress and overreacting. Anna wasn't convinced. She called the police. Officers came to question Greg, but since he hadn't physically entered her home, there wasn't much they could do. The next day, Anna moved out. She packed her things and left without a word to Greg. A few weeks later, Anna was contacted by a former tenant of the guest house who had rented it before her. She told Anna that Greg had done the exact same thing to her, watching her, trying the doors and denying it when confronted. Anna was disturbed. How many other women had Greg done this to? How many people had stayed in that guest house, unaware of the man lurking just outside? She reported everything to the police, but Greg was never charged. Anna moved on, but she would never forget the terrifying feeling of being watched, all because of an innocent-looking Craigslist ad.